we're headed out of town for a couple of days. Perfect timing.
Oh, where are you going?
We're just going to go to the coast, dink around. I did want to touch bases with you, though, because it's been a while since we've chatted.
Look for rocks.
I probably will look for rocks. Yeah. Do you have a problem with that?
Yeah, that's fine. So anyways, have you seen the new regs?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk to you about some of these proposed rules. Or are they regulations? I don't even know.
The regulations are going to go into effect in like 60 days. So 60 or 90 days. It's a real deal. It's happening. But are we starting now? Should we start with the real
Hey, this is Redirect Immigration Law and Perspectives, a somewhat regular, somewhat irregular immigration law podcast. I'm here with my co-host, immigration attorney Matthew Archambault. I'm tripping all over myself. We're off to a hot start here. But Matthew, how are you?
Oh, I am fantastic. Never been better. It's actually a nice day today, so it's okay. I'm okay. How you doing?
Well, just great. Not really. Everything's pretty much terrible, but
yeah,
I did want to talk to you about some recent regulations that were published, I don't know, just like a couple days ago. And you said you had thoughts about them. Now, these have to do with the asylum seeking process, right?
Yeah. So essentially, there's a recognition that there's this humongous backlog in immigration courts. And a lot of those cases are asylum.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, maybe like to set the table, we should talk to our listeners a little bit about like what the process looks like and what's going on right now with asylum.
Yeah, well, I think the regs that affect the way asylum is the process where a person who comes into the United States can file for asylum and have their claim heard. They decided to change it up a little bit in one part because there's such a backlog in immigration courts. And also, I think the desire that these cases are adjudicated quicker, because in the current process, a case might take 3, 4, 5 years to go through the whole process.
Maybe even longer.
Maybe even longer. Right. So the current process is, well, let's just deal with the person who comes into the United States, either presents themselves at a port of entry to come in or crosses over unlawfully through the desert or through the river. They're encountered by immigration officials and they claim that they are afraid to go back to their country for whatever reason. They want to file for asylum. So there are two things that are done now, and we're going to exclude exclusions like Title 42B. We're going to talk about people who are allowed in. One, they may be given what they call an expedited order removal and allowed to go through what they call a credible fear process. They have a credible fear interview. If they pass that interview, then they're put in the immigration court and an immigration judge will hear their claim. The other way that happens is they're just led into the United States and they're given a notice to go to the immigration court, and they go to immigration court and then they would file their application for asylum. So they decided to change this up a little bit, where now they're still going to have people have credible fear interviews with asylum officers. These are officers who are trained specifically in how to adjudicate things like fear interviews, asylum applications. They receive extensive training in country conditions, what they call particular social groups, political, the whole aspect of the asylum claims. And so they'll do what they call a credible fear interview. Now, when they conduct a credible fear interview, and these credible fear interviews, they can be an hour long. I've had credible fear interviews that were 3 to 4 hours long. I know colleagues have had credible fear interviews that have been even longer than that. They're pretty intensive. They cover the person's complete history, immigration history, their history back home, everything that they're afraid of. And a good asylum officer will...
Sorry to interrupt you. I forget the exact language, but they're looking for basically the seeds of a viable asylum claim, right?
Right. And one would think it would be a relatively brief interview, but my experience is that Some of them are pretty brief. I've seen some that are pretty brief, but others are very intensive and they really get into everything. But Stephen, you're right. What they're looking for is, does the person have a credible claim for either asylum or torture if they're returned to their country, either be persecuted or tortured if returned? They're not making a determination that the person should get asylum, right? They're just saying, hey, everything they say sounds credible. It could be true. And if it's true, it could be a basis for asylum. And then the process now is that you go to immigration court. The applicant would provide more information. The government attorney could cross-examine them. The judge will look deeper into the matter. And that is supposed to come up with the truth, so to speak.
Can I ask you a question? It seems like at some point during the Trump administration, they stopped doing credible fear interviews almost altogether. Or are they still happening at the border? Because I haven't seen one in a really long time.
Yeah, for me, it's hit or miss, right? I think there was a whole period of time where there were no credible fear interviews. And then the people were allowed to come in.
Just without screening.
Without the credible fear screening. Just so our right-wing listeners understand, there's still screened background. There's still checks that are placed upon them. They're just not asked anything about if they have a fear going back or given an in-depth interview about it. So that's a process now. And where things usually get bogged down is the immigration court side, because the immigration court side may take, like we just said, 2, 3, 4 years, maybe longer. So they said, okay, well, we have these asylum officers, and what we'll do is the asylum officer will give a credible fear interview. If they pass the interview, that will be their asylum application. That will count as their asylum application for things like employment authorization. And also, when you apply for asylum to be eligible, generally, you have to file within 1 year of entering the United States. So, and lots of times what has happened in the past is people have come into the United States, maybe had a credible fear interview or not, and they didn't receive a court hearing for 2, 3 years later. They never filed, so they were filing applications that were untimely and therefore not eligible for asylum. They'd be eligible for lesser forms of relief. So now they're going to say, okay, you passed your credible fear interview. That's your asylum application. You're kind of locked in. You're protected, which is good. I think that's a really good positive change. And they say, now what we're going to do is we're going to send you back to, I don't know if the same asylum officer, but an asylum officer who's going to conduct a further hearing to talk about your eligibility for asylum. And now this is supposed to happen, I believe, within like 21 days or so of your credible fear interview. And then the officer will hear their claim. And if they believe they qualify for asylum, they win, they're given asylum. And then they go about their time here in the United States. And so part of me looks at it and goes, well, that could be really good, because I've had a lot of clients when it's really obvious in the credible fear interview that they're deserving of asylum. And then they have to wait, 2, 3, 4 years to have their cases heard. And oftentimes they have spouses back in their countries or, children back in their countries, right, that are, susceptible to harm that they really want to get over. So this would accelerate things. However,
this was one of the frustrations that we had Jason DeBow on the show back in December. And he deals, I think, mostly with affirmative asylum applications, which are people who are already here. They've entered on maybe a student or a tourist visa. And he deals with people, perhaps, I don't want to speak for him, but maybe people who have really sort of in the bag asylum claims in certain ways. But because the whole system is bogged down, they're filing and their case is taking infinity years, 5 years, 6 years. And so, he was expressing his frustration with that. So, yeah, I think if there is a way to take the cases that are sort of obvious and get the approvals out of the way, that's good for the respondents, right? And for the applicants.
Yeah, in theory, right? And so after you have a positive, credible fear interview, you're supposed to have a final interview within 45 days. Now, there's a recognition that there's a huge backlog in immigration court. I don't want to say there's a bigger backlog, but there's also a huge backlog in the asylum office. So unless they really beef up the adjudicators for the asylum office, I don't see how this really solves any problem, because I think practically what's going to happen is you're going to start getting these backlogs, and there's no way they're going to be able to do these interviews within 45 days. And if they do the interviews within 45 days, that just means all those cases that Jason filed that he's been complaining about, and certainly everyone else, right? They're going to get pushed back further and further. So I don't really understand. It's like we're trying to solve one problem with the immigration court, but we're going to create an even worse problem at the asylum unit. And I just don't think it's going to work.
Right. So it's a little bit like, what do they call it? Reorganizing the deck chairs on the Titanic, right?
Well, I think it's even worse, because now here's the next part.
You know that the Titanic sunk to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, but how fast did it sink? Because here's the next part, right? If they're denied by the asylum office, then they can seek review by the immigration judge. So we back up the asylum unit, and then we're going to get some approvals out of the way, but then we're going to still have them come into the immigration court. And it's also supposed to alleviate the problem of disparate treatment of claims, because anyone who practices immigration law knows that, you know, one claim that I might have here in Philadelphia before one particular judge might be a pretty solid chance of winning. But if I go down the hall, even in Philadelphia, to another judge, they don't have any chance of winning. And so asylum officers are seen as being more fair. I think that's generally the case, but I know there are bad asylum officers out there. And I know that there are asylum officers that are a lot more generous out there. So it's just an interesting way. And there's a lot more to the new regs than that, but that's the basics, that they want to put a lot more load onto the asylum office that really can't absorb it.
I don't know how you deal with this issue other than, honestly, just it's a question of resources, right? I mean,
yeah,
it should be a tripling or quadrupling of the budget. There should be really, like, all these ports of entry should have robust asylum units. And as long as you're going to screen people based on fear and legitimacy of their claim, like, that's really the only way around this, because you're right. We deal with the San Francisco Asylum Office, and we've got applications that were filed years ago. And periodically what they do is they'll sort of reshuffle the deck. They'll say, okay, actually now it's last in, first out. So they'll start doing interviews for people who recently applied. Well, if you applied 3 years ago, now you're back to the end of the line. And this is just another version of that. You're going to take these asylum officers from San Francisco, and you're going to have them be doing these sort of aggressive screenings at the border, which is great. But then again, if you applied for asylum 5, 6, 7, in some cases 8 or 9 years ago, at this point, for real, at least in my experience, you're going to probably be waiting even longer. And the practical implications of that is, you know, you might be somebody who's got what everybody would agree is a winnable slam dunk case, and your spouse could be abroad or your minor children could be abroad, and you're not able to bring them here until your case is adjudicated and heard. And so it is one of those situations where it can foster ill will in the immigrant community, where Afghans get upset at the fact, you know, they view Mexicans at the border as getting preferential treatment, and Mexicans at the border view Afghans as getting preferential treatment, and this sort of thing. And at the end of the day, it's not really fixing the problem.
I mean, it is resources, right? I am not of the belief that you need more immigration judges. I think more people on the USCIS side, asylum officer side would be better suited. But I think there's other things that could, help to alleviate the immigration court problem. There are a lot of things in immigration court that probably should be handled by USCIS. You have things like waivers that are in immigration court that USCIS is the administrative side of things. People that we file waivers all the time with USCIS, and it's all adjudicated on the paper, just on the evidence that we send in. But the immigration court, you can't do that. You need to go to court multiple times. You need to have a hearing and have witnesses. And it's those things that the same process is done one way fairly efficiently, right? And you think of a waiver that you would file in with USCIS, a year is going to be a long wait time. If you're in immigration court, it's going to be 3, 4, 5, 6 years, maybe longer.
Yeah, but I mean, even I agree with you, but even if you look at like a 601A waiver right now, those are waivers adjudicated by USCIS. And traditionally, they've taken 6 months to a year, maybe. And right now, they're sitting at about 2 years.
But still more efficient than immigration court.
Right. But I mean, either one of these things, I don't think are going to really get resolved by kicking the can back. And you don't really kick a can. You kick a can down the road, but not back.
Yeah.
What do you do? It's like a hot potato, right? Back and forth.
Yeah, I mean, the real answer is open up way more avenues of relief for people, immigration reform, basically.
Right.
To empty out the immigration courts. And then maybe you can have a better system that deals with those seeking refuge here in the U.S., a more expedient system. Because let's be a little bit honest about it, and you don't have to be honest about it. I'll do it for you. There are people that will come to us with claims of asylum that are going to be hard to win. Okay.
Right.
And it doesn't mean that they're not afraid to go back. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't be in danger if they went back. It just means that under current law, it's probably not a recognized claim. You take a 22-year-old kid from El Salvador who's been being recruited by gangs, and he's afraid if he goes back, because he resisted them, they're going to target him and beat him up and kill him or whatnot. It's not a claim that's going to win asylum, right? But we understand why he's afraid, right? It's not bullshit.
Right.
So we can file an asylum, and sometimes earning that person more time here. So one, maybe they can put some time and distance between the threat, even though we understand that doesn't necessarily work too well with gangs. But, hopefully something else pans out for the kid. Or maybe it's just enough time for that person to earn a little money that can help them, or to get an education, or to get something. So there are times that we are trying to stretch out the time here. And when you start to try to accelerate things from a real practical standpoint for our clients, if I'm going to be honest, that can be harmful. Now we have the other clients, right, who have those cases that we know they can win. So we want those to be expedited. We want those to be heard. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah, it's easy to get myopic about these issues and say, well, we just need more asylum officers or we need more resources. But I agree with you. One of the issues is the lack of availability of other venues. So I remember this was during the Obama administration, meeting with an elderly couple who'd come and been paroled and placed in removal proceedings, presumably to seek asylum. They presented themselves at a port of entry and they were issued a notice to appear. And so I went through the whole consultation, asked them about fear of going back, and they got kind of confused. And finally, at the end, what they were trying to say is like, no, we want to go back. We actually don't want to be here. We don't really like it. We just wanted to visit our kids. And they kind of I don't think that they were abusing the system. They had heard that one way to get in is to go to the border and say, we want to come visit our kids. And so they ended up in this same system somehow. And really what they needed was a tourist visa. And if you look at like a lot of the people, for example, fleeing Ukraine right now, a lot of them have family members here that they could live with. And they don't necessarily want to live here forever. And in a lot of cases, once they're here, they would have other opportunities besides asylum, like adjustment of status or a family petition. And so, what if they could just be issued like a 5-year work permit to come and like live with their family? And at the end of the 5 years, if they've applied for asylum, great. And if not, hopefully things back home have improved. I don't know, like just opening up these other venues and other visas and opportunities is really what's going to reduce the stress at the border. Even like on the employment side, we have employment visas, but they're really hard to get. And it's mostly for doctors or professional athletes. But I mean, there's obviously other categories. I mean, my entire clientele are farm workers. And there's not really a ton of opportunities for somebody to come and say, hey, like I'm willing to live in Central Washington and do farm work. Great. Here's a visa. Like those things don't exist. And as long as they don't exist, it's going to just put more and more pressure on the venues that are available to people, including the asylum system.
Before anyone, spouts off, I mean, there are agricultural worker visas that exist, but they're not readily available. I've always thought that, people should be allowed to get a general work visa so they could go compete in the marketplace, which one of the criticisms of, unlawful immigration or even specialty visas is that they drag down wages because they can hire someone who's undocumented for less money and pay them cash. That's going to depress wages. I think there's a whole bunch of studies. You can go to the Cato Institute that really kind of disprove that hypothesis. But then the answer would be, well, let's just give people general work visas. And, as long as you show your work, and if you're working at a gas station, great. You work at McDonald's, fantastic. You work out in the fields, whatever. And that person can go. And when they're able to readily, if every job is open to them and they're not closed because people who are undocumented can only work at places that hire undocumented workers, and that's a limited subset of jobs. But if everything's open to them, they're going to go to the highest paying job, right? Like these people aren't silly. They're not going to be like, yeah, I'm going to do this job that pays $8 an hour, even though I could get that job that pays $15. Now they're going to take the job that pays $15. But the thing is, there is no creativity within immigration, especially within the immigration visa side. We have these strict categories that everyone has to fit into. And something like what I'm talking about, or what Stephen's talking about, is gonna take a bill in Congress. That does not seem like it has any chance of ever passing, ever, in the continuing history of our country. So
yeah, I mean, what if there was
this problem is just going to continue,
right?
So I guess this is like, if you say this is like the Titanic, this new regulation here, it's like 2 or 3 guys with buckets trying to like get the water out of the Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, there are agricultural visas, but they're temporary. You don't really get to choose where you go. So if you have family in Central Washington and there's work here, you don't get to pick, that's the place I'm going. They send you somewhere. And then there's concerns about, treatment of the workers and the conditions and things like that. What if there was just like I want to live with my family for a year visa and just hang out because my sister lives in San Francisco and she's got a room and I just want to, see what it's like. There's not really such a thing. And we treat tourist visas, with such detained at airports and they go through their phones and, all these sorts of things. People are constantly being harassed and deported because the CBP thinks that they're going to stay a little bit longer than they might have indicated. But
big shout out to that type of behavior, because it has gotten me quite a few clients over the years of elderly parents of U.S. citizens who have to apply for green cards just to come to visit their grandchildren. And they use the green card like a tourist visa.
Right.
It's like, this person's 75 years old. All they do is want to come and visit their grandchild. And it's like, no, we're not going to give you a tourist visa. Okay.
Yeah, we don't believe you. We think that you really want to stay forever.
Now, but if you do want to stay forever, you just file this paperwork. It'll be very easy. We'll approve it and we'll let you come and stay forever.
Right. But not for 6 months. Right.
So it makes absolutely no sense. And it's one of the, there's so many frustrating things about this job, like everything.
Mm-hmm.
But, that conversation with, my elderly parents want to come to visit and they keep getting denied a tourist visa. Can you help them? It's like, not get a tourist visa, but if you're a citizen, you can spend more money and get an expensive tourist visa, because that's exactly what it is.
Right.
But it's a thought process that everyone in the entire world, of course, wants to live here in the United States.
It reminds me of before Trump was elected, we interviewed a guy from New Zealand, like an immigration consultant. And he told us that in New Zealand, like, if you go and you visit and you have a girlfriend, you can get a girlfriend visa. Basically, like, hey, I know someone here. I'm in a relationship. Let me stay a little while longer. And they'll give you a work permit. And I don't know why we can't think a little bit outside of the box. And, I'm also wary of setting up more and more parameters, and I would like these categories to get a little bit broader, a little bit looser in a certain sense, right?
Just so no one misunderstands me, I would just like open borders.
Right, exactly.
So I think that would solve the problem. However, realizing that we're not going to get open borders anytime soon, we're just kind of trying to talk around maybe more practical solutions.
Right.
Quite frankly, open borders is as much of a pipe dream as just regular old immigration reform.
Yeah, that's true. As long as we're going to dream, we might as well dream big, right?
Exactly. So, I've been watching the Kentanji. Am I saying it? I'm going to say her name wrong.
You are.
Judge Jackson.
You know what? Like, have
you watched the confirmation hearings?
I've been really distracted by work and war stuff. And I just found I tried watching the hearings a couple times and I just didn't have the stomach for the bull.
Well, yeah, there was so much bull in, there's so much racism, misogyny, and good old transphobia. That's always, a good go-to for the GOP. But what I thought the most frustrating was that there were lawyers on that panel, either just stupid, like Tom Cotton, who I believe went to, law school and Harvard Law or something like that, and Ted Cruz, who was actually a classmate of Judge Brown. The line of attack that Judge Brown, you called George Bush and Donald Rumsfeld war criminals because when she filed the habeas petitions, the court filings, you're suing the United States and you have to name somebody, which she explained is sovereign immunity and all that stuff. So you have to name someone. So the president and their secretary of defense are named personally. And then when Obama took over, it became Obama and Gates. But saying how outrageous that you would call President Bush and Secretary Rumsfeld war criminals. First of all, they are.
Right.
Okay. And by the way, Obama was as well, and so was Gates. So they were war criminals. However, it's a stupid thing to put on her. And either they don't know how filings in federal court work, or they do and they're just being disingenuous. And it's probably the second. It's like when we file a petition for review, when someone is denied asylum and we take it all the way to the federal court, we'll name the attorney general, whoever the attorney general. Who's the attorney general right now?
Merrick Garland.
Merrick Garland. Like, it will be my client suing Merrick Garland. It's not him. I know he didn't do anything. He's not the judge that denied the case and, it up or whatnot. It's just he's the one that's named. I just thought those arguments, I don't think they're as insulting as the other ones, but from a law perspective, it's like, come on, man. That's not it.
Right. I got really frustrated at Obama because, he had a real opportunity with the Congress, especially, to actually look into some of that stuff. Because I know Tom Cotton also made a point about, should we let all the detainees at Guantanamo Bay out, and wouldn't that be super dangerous? Well, we could have had a real reconciliation with our past and the mistakes that we made. And I get from a certain perspective that Obama didn't want to turn the country into one of those places where every other president goes to jail on some like trumped up political thing, right? Like Peru.
Yeah.
But, when there's crimes, there's crimes. And also I think that it's hilarious that he had this vision of the executive, it's sort of immune to these kinds of partisan attacks. And the very next president is trying to get his vice president's son in jail. So it just shows the futility of sort of liberal politeness and this idea that we can just look forward. The GOP is always willing to whitewash the past. And so it's up to us to actually deal with those things. But yeah, I mean, really, really dumb to put that stuff on her. And the QAnon sort of actually she's soft on pedophilia. That's all a big wink and a nod to the QAnon folks. And that's really gross too. I mean, give me a...
Yeah, I mean, the whole Tom Cotton they're all pretty bad. Not all of them.
Yeah, they are.
I think Ben Sass might have been the one Republican who wasn't an ass, but he's not running for re-election, so I guess he can. And he probably wants a spot on CNN or something. Whatever. But Tom Cotton, the one case that they were highlighting for this 18-year-old who possessed child porn, and she only sentenced him for 3 months. And he's like, well, he came back to you a couple years later and you gave him a 6-month sentence. Why was that? And it was a probation violation. It's like, I don't know. I signed the order. He must have violated probation. It's like, you don't know. You don't remember. I can't believe that. And she's like, believe it. I don't remember. And he's like, I think it's because he was caught with child porn again. That's why. Let me try to put it a different way. If someone is out dealing drugs and they do prison time and then they're out on probation and they get caught dealing drugs again, well, it is a probation violation, but you know what it also is? A f***ing crime that they're going to get indicted for and charged and if found guilty, sentenced for that crime.
Once you're convicted once, if you do it again on probation, it's just probation violation.
So if the guy had more child porn, he would have been indicted for more child porn. And it's not like Tom Cotton doesn't know that, right?
Well,
he's not. I mean, I'm going to give him credit to say that he's not that stupid. But it's all about QAnon. And QAnon, someone had said this, and I didn't really believe them. They said QAnon's going to last longer than Trump. And they're right.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we don't even have time to get into the Jeannie Thomas stuff. But yeah, anyways, I do have to go. But it was good chatting with you and catching up. Let's do it again next week.
Wow.
2 in a row. Can you handle it?
I don't even know. I'm going to have to check my calendar. I'm going to have to check. I have to talk to my therapist.
Okay.
About it.
Good.
Maybe I'm going to light some candles, burn some sage.
Pray on it.
Oh, pray. That's what I do for everything.
Goes without saying. All right. Good chatting. I'll talk to you next week.
All right. Take care. Love you.